Good morning, Joe. Good morning, Conference. I wish to propose on behalf of Lincolnshire LDC the equalisation of the UDA rate across England. First, I'd just like to remind of how the UDA rate was calculated. So the financial value of the UDA varies between dental practices as it's a measure of activity taken during a 12-month period from 2004 to 2005, fully 14 years ago. It has not been possible under present regulations to have the UDA value recalculated or revalued over that time. Just to bring you up to date, the average UDA value for 2016 and 17 was £26.34. 43% of practices were above this, or values are above this value, and 57% were below the £26.34 value. But 1 in 5 were £3 or more above the £26.34, and 1 in 5 contract values were £3 or more below that figure. This gap has widened and continues to grow on every percentage increase we receive from the Department of Health. We feel in Lincolnshire that this is divisive. In our view, a patient being treated on the National Health Service should attract the same payment for the same treatment, regardless of which practice they choose to be treated in. Fair and equitable for all. And this will apply, as Henrik mentioned, for the future as well, for the activity measures on the reformed contract. For this to happen under present regulations and for contract values to be maintained, an equalisation process would have to take place. Some practices, those with the higher UDA rates, would have to see more patients to maintain their contract value, whereas others with the lower UDA rates would see fewer patients. There will obviously be winners and losers here, but by maintaining practice contract values for all, the financial stability of the practices should remain. Lastly, I want to consider the effects of a historic low UDA rate on a number of practices in Lincolnshire and in rural areas. It has become increasingly difficult for these practices to recruit. And having had much of the groundwork, some of these dentists coming from abroad, it's very frustrating when they leave and go down the road, or worse for our county, leave it to a higher UDA rate somewhere else. These practices are finding it difficult to meet their contract targets. There's increasing levels in Lincolnshire of clawback, reducing business and financial stability of these practices. There is increased levels of stress and burnout for these historically low UDA practices. The subject to our LDC AGM this year was a dental profession under strain. What are we doing about it? Well, I was told to come here for this conference and make the case for the equalisation of the UDA. In conclusion, I give you 3 thoughts. Equalisation, it ensures the same payment for the same treatment. It ends the widening gap of the UDA rate imbalance, which is perpetuating every year. And it helps with recruitment and retention issues for practices with historically low UDA rates.
Can we just sum up now?
Please support this motion, Conference.
Thank you, Roger. So we call on Edward from Birmingham speaking against the motion.
I think the fundamental flaw in that is it's equal pay for equal work. It's not equal pay for equal work. The UDA is flawed. We know the calculations right at the beginning were flawed, but equalising it doesn't make it any fairer, I'm afraid. You know, if you're going to have to do this, then you're going to have to look at the activity of individual practices to see what they're doing in each course of treatment. And by doing this, you're really going to penalise some of the inner-city practices that do shed loads of work for an average UDA value where they need a higher value. I'm sorry. Oppose it.
Next speaker is Philip Martin from Leicestershire speaking for the motion.
Actually, our LDC is badly split on this one, and I note our chair is behind me in the queue, and he'll no doubt be speaking against the motion. Correct? Yeah. My UDA rate is 2050, that now. That means for every band 1 treatment I do, I have to pay the NHS, I have to pay the government £1.10. The practice a quarter of a mile up the road who's seeing the same patients as me, doing the same treatment, is getting £27 a UDA. Coupled with clawback and increasing costs, this is making it less and less viable for me to continue to run the practice. And I have seriously started to consider just handing the contract back. NHS England would then have to recommission it at a sensible rate and pay me what everybody else, or pay whoever got that contract, what everybody else is being paid. I have to say, I'm not entirely sure about equalisation, but I certainly think that the lower rates should be raised so that nobody is receiving less than the band 1 charge for a UDA rate.
Hear, hear.
So, whilst we don't have that as a motion, I think this is the next best thing, so I'm going to urge you to support this motion. Please vote with Roger.
Thank you, Philip. So we're calling on Alistair McKendrick from the Agenda Committee, speaking against the motion.
Yeah, morning, conference. Thank you, Joe. Great speech last night. Deck chairs on Titanic, okay? Don't vote for this motion. If you give this motion breathing space, it gives the UDA credibility. Just forget the UDAs. This is rubbish.
Thank you. So we move on to Hanif Moti from Leicestershire, speaking for the motion. Against the motion. I apologise.
Good morning. I echo what Eddie just said. It doesn't make sense. There is no right formula in calculating. Yes, the calculation at the start in 2016 was made on a wrong sort of baseline. Any business that you value that over 3 years. All of you know that. And at the time, the valuation was done over 1 year. And some practices may have done well in the year before. Some practices may have not done that well in that year before. But that's down to the way it was. I don't think this equalization is going to be fair for anyone. If anything, practices who are earning less than the UDA value should be probably re-evaluated, and they should be reassessed and see if there's any funding for them, but not to penalize people who are already on a value, who are running at that level of running a practice. They didn't really purposely work hard in the reference year. They worked the way they work, and that's the way it is. So I vote against it.
Thank you, Hanif. Let's take the debate out of Leicestershire now and bring Paul McCrory from Bury speaking against the motion.
Yes, I think that what they should have is a minimum UDA rate, not necessarily the patient charge, perhaps just a little bit higher. A couple of other points. I believe that in the early days, at least a number of practices had a number of contractors had their UDA rates increased because they argued that they weren't able to.
I think that should be £20, Mr. Schimberg.
Either that or yes, a single song.
Yeah. I hope I wasn't
Sorry.
dancing to that.
Sorry, Paul. Carry on, Paul.
Yeah, my understanding is that a number of practices had their UDA rates increased because they argued that they couldn't, it wasn't financially viable. So if that is true, and I'm not 100% on it, then I think that should still be the case, that the local area teams or whoever is responsible for authorising an increase in value should consider that, or reducing the number of UDAs that you have to do. That should still be in the cards if it's been on the cards in the past. The other thing is that with regard to any contract reform, my understanding is that the GDPC is arguing that there should be a revaluation of UDAs if it's along those systems at that point. And in that regard also, I think that if we are due to have a new contract being introduced around about 2020, 2021, then the reference year will either be this year, 2018-19, or possibly 2019-2020, or possibly over 2 years. So any practices that are thinking of, trying to, manage the situation for the future of the contract might want to consider whether there is going to be a reference year or years and when those are likely to be. But my best bet is it's either this year, next year, or the 2 years. Okay.
Thank you, Paul. We have no more speakers to the motion.
Can I just come back?
Oh, sorry, yes, you have a minute to come back, Roger, sorry.
I think before you vote, you've really got to consider the practices on the historically low UDA rate. For they are struggling. They are finding it hard in these rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you. So I was kind of thinking that this might be a Leicester-only vote, but let's have it across all of England. So all those in favour of motion 19, please raise your cards. All those against? That's a clear defeat of the motion. Thank you very much. Sorry, abstentions? Right, that's a clear defeat. Thank you very much, Conference.
We have had an abundance of eloquent, passionate argument highlighting the deficiencies in the current NHS contract. I believed that no date had been set for implementation, but I have been corrected on that. Apparently dates are set and then they are ignored or postponed for implementation. I've been fortunate to mix with a great many young colleagues in recent years, and I believe their disillusionment and betrayal a feeling of betrayal is even greater than our own. Dentistry is incredibly low on the government priority agenda, and I understand from reading a GDPC, a thread, not GDPC, on the practice GDP UK forum, that Jeremy Hunt hasn't even met our Chief Dental Officer. I believe, Northamptonshire LDC believe we need to focus the minds of the politicians and explain to the public that we can no longer make do with such a mutually harmful system. It seems to me that unless crises occur, politicians take no action whatsoever. And I think we owe it to the younger generation of dentists to make a stand. I'm far from confident of your support on this motion. I don't believe we're trying to undermine the good work that our excellent colleagues are doing in trying to negotiate. But we're playing a straight bat, as they say, and can we really believe that the government and the Department of Health are doing the same? So Northants LDC call on Conference to reject the UDA system immediately, regardless of contract reform. Thank you.
Thank you, Geraint. Have we any speakers to the motion? Henrik, yep. Can you turn Henrik on, please?
Could I just ask, I mean, I'm all for taking a stand and I'm all for giving them a good kick up the backside. However, if the motion is meant to influence policy for GDPC, I'm a little bit unclear what exactly you want me to do about this. Because obviously each person here holds a contract to perform UDAs. GDPC cannot reject UDAs as such. We are pushing very hard for getting rid of them. Absolutely, and I agree with that. But are we saying that we should tell the profession to stop performing UDAs? Is that what the motion is about? I'm just trying to get a little bit of a steer of what you would like me to do on this motion.
I think Alistair McKendrick could come and speak, because I'm really his mouthpiece on this one. So.
He's sitting... Oh, here he is.
Okay.
I presume you're speaking for the motion.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a, it's a no. I can't believe there's any debate. Anyway, look. I think that the trouble here is I haven't worded it very well, and I apologise, okay? Rejecting the UDA is... We've got to get rid of them, and so I think that there's a problem with this motion in the way I've written it. Geraint actually wanted to talk about how it's de-skilling the profession. And in fact, there's so many things wrong with the UDA, I mean, we could have a whole conference about it. So I accept that this is unhelpful, and I apologise, Henrik.
Yet another apology from Mr. McKendry. So if we have no more speakers, shall we go to a vote? This is an England-only vote. And all those in favour, please raise your cards. Oh. All those against, please raise your cards. Any abstentions? That was defeated with a majority. Thank you.
So my motion is that I ask the conference to demand that GDPC works with NHS England to improve the procurement process, making sure that it supports the sustainable provision of service for the benefit of patients. Okay, obviously recently in London, maybe the rest of the country, we had the procurements for the IMOS contracts, that's in minor oral surgery. The whole value of those contracts was to move work out of expensive secondary care to primary care. Obviously, the secondary care then used NHS resources to bid for those contracts to reverse that, which I think is unsustainable. The same thing has happened in ortho, in our area down in Kingston. They won the orthodontic contract. Sorry, the minor oral surgery was won by Northwood Park and also King's College as well in London. Same thing's going to happen with endo. Secondary care are going to bid for those contracts and move it back in secondary care. And you know, that's the direction of travel. Also, I want to make a side note that, you know, we keep on asking for contract reform, but, you know, any contract reform for GDS contracts, I think Sarah Hurley's made it very clear that she wants timely contracts. So I think eventually then what is happening to the orthodontists now will happen for the GDS contractors as well. So I think we need to think very carefully about GDS contract reform. I ask you to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any speakers to this motion? This is an England-only motion, and so all those in favour, please raise your cards. All those against? And any abstentions? So that was passed with a majority. Thank you.
Morning, Conference. The recent DPS-based orthodontic procurement process in the south of England is professed to be based on service need, with proposed centres of commissioned activity in some areas remote from practices that traditionally provided orthodontic care. Some of the practices affected by this new commissioning approach have loyally delivered NHS orthodontic care over decades and now face a bleak future with the value of their practices seriously diminished unless they are prepared to relocate. Practice staff are either made redundant or subject to TUPE arrangements. The damage to the sustainability of practice not able to compete is huge, and the funding availability to complete orthodontic treatments inadequate. This motion highlights the potential future plight for GDS contracts in NHS England were minded to unilaterally vary and impose non-time-limited contracts. The future of these practices would literally be at the mercy of the postcode lottery. Please support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. This motion also incorporates motion 22A.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Very enjoyable evening last night, and thank you for everybody who contributed to the sweepstake. DPS is not fit for purpose. I'd like to thank Birmingham LDC for sponsoring me to be here today. I am a specialist practitioner, and I did try to fight against the new contract in 2006. A question was asked at an open meeting as to why we had a 3-year contract. As a result of that, it was increased to a 5-year contract. But I now know I was not assertive enough, and I should have asked, why haven't we got a non-time limited contract? I didn't. The commissioners are now basing their decisions on a needs assessment. This needs assessment is widely recognised as not fit for purpose. None would gain approval due to their poor methodology if they were submitted for biomedical, scientific, research or ethic committee approval. In the last few weeks across the north, the light touch DPS has been launched. It's an odd exercise. Each area is doing it differently. There's a triage of bidders to decide who can go forwards to bid for the contract. How many will lose their contracts? The BDA have very, very kindly fought on the behalf of the BOS. I am an active member of the BS and I do own their Special Service Award, but we're ineffective as a charity, so thank you, the BDA, for supporting us. How many will lose their contracts? The area teams proudly tell us that the patients are theirs. With ownership comes responsibility. The area team may find that they lose more than they gain by the race to the bottom on price. What will be the outcome if and when any patients or their families who may have siblings, I've got one family with 6 kids, but when their families decide that they've got experience of high quality treatment by their present provider and they object to relocation or being sent to somebody with lack of expertise to deliver on the contract, they may decide to litigate. In summary, we have chaos. It is destabilising, it's demoralising, it's disincentivizing, and it is diskilling the profession. I now supervise a dentist with a special interest, a therapist, 2 nurses, 2 scanning technicians, and everybody else talks about why we can't do the treatment. The DPS was designed for multiple purchasing of low-value items. An example that was given to me was a hospital that wanted to buy sandwiches. Its robust, stringent due diligence would allow for multiple pre-approved vendors to buy sandwiches from. It is not designed for high-value orthodontic contracts, which are basically bought on a one-off 7+3 model 10-year plan. I feel like meat, as described in the recent London information, that it's going to be the most economic, advantageous tender. It's not about value for money, quality and price, but I do hope that the light touch may come in. I'm old enough to remember DPS meaning Dental Practice Solutions. I'd bid you to support the motion that it is not fit for purpose.
Thank you, Jill. So we've got Philip Martin from Leicestershire speaking for the motion.
Orthodontic commissioning in the East Midlands has been postponed so many times, I've lost count now. We're now told it will come in another year or 2 years. But in a conversation I had with the commissioners, they said that the intention is when they do this, all things being equal, they will use a dynamic purchasing system. However, of even greater concern to me is the fact that on Tuesday of this week, I attended a core group meeting for the MCN in restorative dentistry. And we looked at the service specification for minor oral surgery, sedation, and Tier 2 endodontics. I was told that the intention is to commission these services as an integrated contract. That seems to be a really good fit. Endodontics and Tier 2 endodontics and Tier 2 minor oral surgery. Yeah, the specialists are going to be able to do both of those. But when I said, well, this isn't practical in any practice, I was told, well, you can always go and bid as consortia. In other words, DPS coming for general contracts as well as orthodontics. I urge you to vote against this motion.
Thank you, Philip. Next to speak is Matt Clover from GDPC, speaking for the motion.
Thank you, Chair. I've had recent experience at both ends of the orthodontic procurement process. I sit on the Clinical Directorate at the British Orthodontic Society and have been involved in contract negotiations with NHS England, and I have just submitted my own bid for an orthodontic contract for my practice in Salisbury. From start to finish, the procurement process has been a shambles. Yesterday, Colette Bridgman told us that a needs assessment is a critical step in the process of commissioning dental activities. In many areas, needs assessments have not been carried out, or at best, out-of-date data has been used. Until a legal challenge to the procurement process, there was no patient engagement at all. After pressure from the BDA and the BOS, NHS England paid lip service to this with a poorly designed questionnaire which has been completed by very few patients. Engagement events with orthodontists were carried out, but it was made clear that no questions could be asked at these events. As we have heard, boundary changes have resulted in existing providers being faced with the options of moving their practice into the newly designed region or accepting that they will be unable to bid for an NHS contract. This will result in many patients having to travel considerably further for their treatment. I could go on, but I won't. The bottom line is that it is the patients that will suffer. I urge you to support this motion.
Thanks, Matt. Next up, we have Paul McCrory speaking for the motion.
Yes, I'm coming at this from a slightly different angle, and some of you will probably know why very quickly. I'm not sure that orthodontic commissioning, the way it's been commissioned at the moment, is fit for purpose, really, and the reason is because of orthodontic relapse. If the NHS is going to make an offer to patients of orthodontic treatment, then I believe that they should provide support in the long term for both the cosmetic and the functional elements of the care which has been provided, and ensuring that's as stable as it's reasonably possible for it to be. I think that if they're going to have commissioning, I think that they should build in a long-term, relatively low cost to patient, cost neutral to the NHS orthodontic retainer service, which covers both the functional and the aesthetic components. I believe that that would increase orthodontic practice turnover because they would have an ongoing service to patients. It would ensure that the patients get the best quality care because they would be being seen by an orthodontic practice which could handle any particular problems that develop, which is not the case for general dental practitioners. And it would also reduce the risk to general dental practitioners who thought they would dabble in orthodontic retention. I also have a particular fear based upon two anecdotal stories which have been told about in relation to dental litigation firms pursuing claims. And what it appears is that these firms have decided to do a blunderbuss approach where they're attacking each element of the orthodontic treatment process, the GDPs and the orthodontists, and to try and find out, and the former contract holder in one case as well, to try and find out who is responsible for what. My fear is that what they're doing is they're seeking to develop a model for pursuing orthodontic relapse. And when they have developed that model properly and they understand how to approach it, then they will scale up their activities in this area. And I have a genuine fear that could be on the cards, and that could lead to a lot more litigation in relation to orthodontic relapse. So I think that the orthodontic commissioning process should be, they should review it in a much broader sense than just the motion itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I don't think we have any more speakers to the motion, so we'll go to the vote. This is England only. Motion 22. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? That's carried with a majority. Thank you. Motion 22A. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? That's carried with a majority. Thank you.
Just before I start, Chair, do you want Bruce to do it before me? No, you're okay.
Quite happy to give you your moment of glory, Eddie.
I just checked, no one's in the queue behind me. Inspired by my successful DDRB motion last year and the success it had on GDPC policy, I'm back with another. I understand DDRB was so worried that I might try again that they've delayed their report till after this conference. So this motion looks at the success of dialogue with NHS England. What was the answer to a reasonable request for a small leeway on UDAs due to the period of snow over the last winter? That would be a no. The request that no UDA value would be below the patient charge, that would be a no as well. The request that new entrants into the prototypes tested something better, that would be a no as well. The request that money's taken from seniority pay, remember that, is paid out as a quality measure as promised when it was removed. That's a no as well. An understanding of the costs that will be incurred by the GDPR regulations, that's no too. Similar understanding over the costs we will incur over the phase down of amalgam, no I presume. Returning to DDRB, a frank and honest discussion about expenses, not using the factors that produce the lowest uplifts in the UK for English dentists, and not treating staff as NHS workers with regards to public sector pay. Let me guess, that's a no as well. How about not tendering UOAs below a value given in 2006, some 12 years ago, and actually consulting patients over proposed new delivery of orthodontics? That was a no also. I've got about 30 more examples, but I've only got 3 minutes. But you get the gist. If we look at the motions here over the last 2 days, let me guess what NHS England will say when reasonable ones are put to them. I'm no clairvoyant, but I have a suspicion it will be the same as their standard answer. So what else can we do apart from being so reasonable? Now, industrial action in this beautifully constructed contract in its traditional form would result in financial benefit for NHS England in clawback and financial penalty for us. Are we so emasculated that our only armoury is dialogue with the marvellous benefits that that is producing? This motion calls on GDPC to look at clever ways of alerting politicians that all is not well in dental practice, where recruitment is becoming a massive problem. Do we have to wait till the crisis deepens until someone in Whitehall sits up and takes notice? After all, Steve Brine, the Minister for Dentistry, is only asking for a new contract to be delayed until we see more patients for the same money and carry out risk assessments and prevention as well. What's unreasonable about that? So how about a day when we all do CPD simultaneously and open our doors to emergencies only? What about examining the contract about what mandatory services really mean? We are intelligent people, so surely finding a means of showing NHS England we have had enough is an intelligent thing to do. Please support this motion.
Thank you, Eddie. We have a speaker for the motion, Nick Patsias from Bromley.
We've been here before. I remember about 10 years ago putting a motion that we should not lie down and for one day a year, one day, have a no NHS day. Well, that motion was defeated. And what did that show? That the fact that we weren't willing to not do NHS treatment for one day, we were spineless. And we've showed that really well. When I first qualified, my first job, the lab work, we had to take it to work to an in-house lab, and it was absolutely rubbish. Nothing I could say or do would make any difference. And I went to my principal and he said, if you behave like a lavatory pan, you'll be crapped on. Well, he said it, not crapped, it much worse. But that's what we've been doing all these years. So we haven't got a loo brush in these hotels either.
Thank you, Nick. This motion also incorporates motion 23A, and Alistair McKendrick or Leah Farrell is going to speak for the motion.
I support this motion. I don't expect for a minute that our profession is ready for something like strike action, but we could get started by starting petitions going. We could use social media to engage the profession. We could even mount demonstrations. It may also be advantageous to join forces with our medic colleagues, and this should be explored. So I vote for raising awareness in a more active way. Thank you.
Morning, conference. I'm really going to miss you. And so this is going to be my swan song. Okay, so in 1996, 22 years ago, I was on the GDSC. Tony Kravitz was Henrik, and John Renshaw was Mick Armstrong. And when I became chairman of the conference for last year, you start to attend meetings of the GDPC Regional Liaison Committee. So 22 years after I'd been on the GDSC, nothing, and I mean nothing, had changed. In fact, it had changed, it had got worse. The contract was worse. The GDC was worse to the profession. The red tape was worse. The treadmill was faster and harder. 22 years after I was first on the GDSC, and it was worse. What are we doing? Yesterday, this conference passed unanimously, thank you card voters, motions that said the Department of Health and NHS England do not care about the oral health of the elderly, do not care about the oral health for the young, do not provide care for adults if they actually need your dentistry. They don't value our staff, and they don't value the dentists who perform it. John Renshaw told me a story, and it might just be a story, when Kenneth Clarke was the Minister of Health under Margaret Thatcher. He said to John, "What have we got to do to you dentists before you realise we don't want you?" Okay, you've got to wake up, conference. You're dentists. You're not NHS dentists, you're dentists. The time has come to tell NHS England and the Department of Health to foxtrot Oscar.
Thank you, Alistair. Speaking for the motion, Mohammed Fiaz from Coventry.
Morning, conference. I'm going to be really quick. A lot of people have talked and it's all been full. So just a little reinforcement on that. One quick example. When I was 14 years old, a while ago, we were doing newspaper rounds in school to get £5 a week for delivering newspapers twice a day. And on Sundays, it was once, but it was terrible because the Times magazine and all the others had the newspapers had heavy magazines in them. There came a day when two of us got together and we phoned each other and said, look, the only way we're going to win is to stick together. If you go, I lose. I go, you lose. So that Sunday morning, we stayed in bed and we vowed not to go until the other one had been found by the shop. We got a terrible, desperate call from the shop half an hour after we were supposed to turn up. He said, I've had 30 phone calls. We said, well, £5 a week isn't enough, mate. 50 pence extra because it's snowing and they're heavy. Please get here. That is agreed on the spot while we were lying in bed on a Sunday. Now, Eddie's made a very, a strong point about why we don't do anything, and that's what NHS England think, that we don't do anything, we haven't got the guts, the spine, etc. I have a very simple idea. Let's face it, is there anybody in this room that actually works 365 days a year? The answer is no. What about next year? We all time our annual leave together for 2 weeks. That will be a strike and a holiday in one. We don't lose any UDAs, but the NHS England will find out exactly what we plan to do, just as a taster. And if that doesn't work, then we'll think of plan B. Otherwise, we can all take annual leave together every year. Thank you. I support this motion.
I've got my holidays booked for 13th of July. Do you want to set it around then? So we have Henrik looking to speak to the motion.
Not quite sure from the last speaker whether we need to book Butlins now so we can all go together. I've got a slight problem with the 23A motion and disengaging with NHS England. I understand the feelings of the motion, and what was it, Foxtrot Oscar, that Alistair said. I might have used that word actually in engaging with NHS England. I do use words like that on a regular basis, and we do try and push them very hard. The problem I have with disengaging is that that was exactly what we did in 2006. In 2006, we left, we did not engage at all, and we ended up with a shitty contract. I'm worried that by disengaging completely, we're going to end up with something that's worse than what we would get otherwise. So I would ask you to vote against the 23A motion, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Henrik.
Can I come back on that? No.
Not really, no, sorry, Alistair. You didn't propose 23, so...
Okay.
It's 23A. 23 is the main motion, and
okay.
Eddie would have the minute.
Okay.
So let's go to a vote. Okay. So motion 23, England only. This is Eddie's motion. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? That's carried with a majority. Motion 23A, the disengaging motion by Alistair McKendrick. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? So that's defeated with a majority. Thank you.
Morning again, Conference. James Hughes, Southern LDC. This motion really is about good manners and respect. Every year in Northern Ireland, we wait for over a year for DDRB payments to be implemented. There seems to be a one-year time zone in operation at the department. 1 year, there was no pay award. On that, is it really a pay award whenever the award is less than inflation? Surely not. This year, there's been a delay in DDRB. Every country will have a delayed pay reward. Welcome to our world. This is not good enough. Please support the motion, and more importantly, for the paymasters that are here, please listen to the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Seamus. Have we any speakers to the motion? Let's go to a vote. This is a UK vote. Everybody has a say. So all those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? That's carried unanimously. That's how it's done, Alistair.
Conference. This motion is about NHS England compensating us for our lost surgery time. Please note, it's not about the fine detail of how. Since 2006, the option of charging patients was for... Start again. Since 2006, the option of charging patients for lost time has gone. It was taken away by NHS England, so they should remunerate us, not expect us to foot the bill from our ever-decreasing margins. These days, contract targets are more difficult to achieve. Originally, we were promised a high-trust, locally flexible approach to our contracts. Some PCTs even asked us to record the number of appointments not kept and short-notice cancellations. We had hoped for a swings and roundabouts approach. It's now more like a game of snakes and ladders, with all the ladders removed. There are funds available for this compensation. Clawback, which has been talked about a lot already, £100 million. It is our money and must be kept within dentistry. All that is required is a method of recording appointments not kept or late cancellations and calculating UDA or UOA reimbursement acceptable to all. Conference. This motion is about the principle that our time is limited and very valuable, so needs to be paid for. Please support this motion. The how is for the GDPC to negotiate. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So we have the next speaker, Anthony Lipschitz. Now, I know that we're in Ireland, but Anthony's going to speak for and against the motion.
It's obvious. I'm from Bedfordshire. We do things differently. I agree with the sentiment, but we can't trust our dental colleagues to exercise restraint in when they claim for their FTAs, and the NHS are going to beat us over the head with our abuse of the system. What I think we need to do is adjust this to say that dentists should be allowed to charge patients for failures, so it's left in our hands. So we're not claiming UDAs, but we should have the ability to be able to charge patients for wasting our time. I did an analysis in my practice. We had over 650 failures last year. I didn't quantify it into financial terms because I didn't want to give myself a heart attack. But we should have the ability to charge patients for wasting our time. And I don't know, Peter, do you want to maybe adjust the wording? No, you don't want to adjust the wording. Well, then I don't know what to say, whether you should vote for or against it. But I think, no, against, because dentists can't be trusted to exercise restraint in their claims. So I think we need to change the wording. Maybe another motion. Sorry, amendment, yes. There, I'll propose an amendment to that. With Bedfordshire, we do things differently, as I said.
Right, so we've had a proposal for an amendment. Do we have a seconder? So the amendment and the written motion needs to be presented.
It's amended to say that dentists should be able to fine patients for failure to attend.
Let me put this clear. If you want to make an amendment, the motion must be rewritten.
Okay.
It has to have a proposer and a seconder, and hand it up to the top table, and then we can debate
Is there a time limit on that?
Sorry?
Is there a time limit?
I was hoping it wouldn't arise. Alistair batted off a few amendment proposals. So, are you looking to make an amendment? Okay. Yes, if you can. So, in the meantime, shall we move on to motion 26? Sorry, Peter. Yes, you can speak in reply to the amendment.
It may be relevant to the amendment. It's
Russell.
just a simple point really towards the motion that you're forgetting us as you fly over again. We have UDAs in Wales, we have patients that don't attend in Wales, we do in lots of other places as well. As with many of the motions, we don't really understand why we're not included in some of these motions. So can you please remember us with your...
I'm happy to include Wales in the vote. Yeah.
Conference, please don't butcher my motion. NHS is for all people. If we want to be part of the NHS family, we have to abide by some of its fundamental rules. I know we're not free at the point of delivery anymore, but no other NHS service fines patients for non-attendance. We would be foolish to ask for this. We have already seen, Anthony has told us, that he knows how many people failed to attend. So he has a mechanism, so it is there to record. I do trust my colleagues as well, incidentally, to be honest and do things. I would reject this motion, but support mine. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Have we anybody speaking to the motion? John Fern from... I'm sure he'll tell us because I can't read his writing. Sorry, John. He's speaking for the motion.
Hi, it's John Fenton from Haringey and Henfield.
For the amended motion. Yeah.
It's basically an amendment. If you're fining someone, it's punitive, and therefore it produces ill will, bad feeling, and you're more likely not to get a result. If you're charging someone for a failed appointment, solicitors charge for failed appointments, then I think it's much more acceptable. The patient understands you're paying for the time. So I'd just like to amend it to a charge rather than a fine.
Have we any other speakers to the amended? Are you going to speak to the amendment? Yeah.
It doesn't create bad will. Every profession, wherever you go, you get fined if you don't attend for this, that, and the other. Why are dentists so different? Are we a special case that we will suddenly produce ill will amongst our patients? Patients who don't arrive, you don't want them anyway. So what difference does it make? 650 failures in my practice. I'm sure if you had to quantify it in your practice as well, it would be the same thing. It's untenable, it's unsustainable, and we should have in the olden days, pre-2006, we used to find patients. None of us went out of business. We didn't lose that many patients. In fact, the patients that are going to leave anyway. You don't want them. They're wasting your time. Thank you.
Okay. Before we take any more speakers, we're going to vote on whether we accept the amended wording. Okay? So once we accept, we will then debate whichever motion the conference decides to carry on. So, for England and Wales only, all those in favour of accepting the amended motion, please raise your cards. All those against the amendment, please raise your cards. So we're going to debate the amended wording. Thank you. So we have we're accepting the amended motion, and that's the motion we're going to debate now. And Marianne English is going to speak for the amended motion.
Hello, Hertfordshire LDC. I just wanted to say that in the olden days, before 2006, when we were allowed to fine patients, patients would very often ring early in the morning, if they had appointments in an hour's time, and say to me, if I don't come to the appointment today, will I be fined? And when I said yes, they came to the appointment. So much time is wasted, and I think that this is the way forward.
Thank you, Marion. Jill Cottam is going to speak for the amended motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not a charity. If the patients don't turn up, my staff still want to be paid and all my expenses are still there. I completely agree with Marion. It should be a deterrent that we can charge. We may then choose not to charge, or we may double the bill for those patients we want to get rid of. I think we should be able to charge.
And Peter Tatton is going to speak against the motion.
Conference, what we're talking about is our time and who pays for it. It's either the patients pay for it or the NHS England, or NHS can pay for it. Personally, I think NHS England should pay for it. They've commissioned our time. They should pay for it.
Dan Cook is going to speak for the motion. And Gwent.
Morning, everyone. I wasn't sure whether to vote for the amended motion or not, really. And I think it would be a great shame if we allowed ourselves to be divided by the two options that we effectively had this morning. The point is whether the NHS are going to pay for the missed appointments or whether the patients are going to pay for the missed appointments. The status quo that we have to pay for them can't continue, and that's why I'm recommending that everyone votes for this, because otherwise it'll be known that we voted against fining patients, and the powers that be will then say, well, dentists aren't bothered about this issue anymore. They've voted against fining patients. They're happy to cover the costs themselves, and we can't allow that to happen. That's why I think you should all vote for this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. We have no more speakers, so this vote is open to England and Wales. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? That looks as though it's carried with the majority. Thank you.
A conservative estimate of what LDCs will spend this year funding representatives at meetings with NHSE is £1.2 million, and that's very generous of us. I accept that it's one of the main jobs of LDCs to debate with NHS England, to sit on the other side of the table and represent our levy payers' interests. And it's absolutely right that the levy should fund this type of representation to keep it independent. However, it's becoming increasingly difficult for many LDCs to afford this because the number of meetings we're expected to attend is increasing exponentially. Furthermore, the nature of what is being asked of LDCs is changing. Rather than being advocates for our levy payers, what we're often doing is more akin to providing professional advice. Our role is morphing into free consultancy to help others fulfil their remit. Now, don't get me wrong, I think we need to keep the LDCs as the go-to resource for advice, but it's time to bring to the attention of NHSE the fact that LDCs have limited funds. I mean, do they know this? We're not an unlimited resource. So, where our input is purely advisory, LDC should ask for a contribution for our time and expertise. And asking for funding isn't a pipe dream. NHSE does find funding for similar situations. For example, attendance at PAGs and MCN chairs are now funded. So there is a potential for this. So let us highlight to NHSE, when our input is advisory and for their benefit, we deserve appropriate remuneration. And if we don't ask for it, we'll never get it. So I please support this motion.
Thank you, Leah. So we have Nick Stoles speaking against the motion.
The conference, I'm really concerned that the message that this might send to the profession, that is that we are going along being paid by NHS England but representing our colleagues. We have to have a very clear separation in this situation. We cannot go along to provide NHS England advice and be not funded by NHS England, but we cannot go along representing our profession and be funded by NHS England. The message that sends is that we're in the pocket of NHS England, and we mustn't be in a position where we're even accused of that. So I would suggest that really, under these circumstances, we vote against this motion.
Thank you, Nick. Are there any other speakers to motion 26? So we go to a vote. This is an England and Wales vote, so all those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? So that's defeated with a majority. Thank you.
I'm not sure how long my voice will actually bear up for this, so I've got backup. It's going to be a double act. Health Education England have recently published version 2 of the PLVE guidance for HEE local offices and applicants. This one. This published guidance describes in some detail how the process is managed, assessed and evidenced. There is a national charging structure within the guidance. However, what is not covered within the guidance is the contractual arrangement between the validation by experienced dentist and the placement practice, which is part of the process, and the practice provides the validation supervisor. The contracts are usually based on associate contracts, but the payment conditions within these contracts can be very variable with very low UDA rates. Thank you. £4 is not unknown. Activity levels are very often set at inappropriately high levels, around 6,000 UDAs for 3.5 days or 4-day week. Sometimes there are charges of many thousands of pounds. £12,000 is the highest that I've come across. NHS England and Health Education England must work with the profession to develop a standardised contract that protects the VED, this is the validation by experience, dentist, and ensures that the desired educational outcomes are achieved. Please support this motion. Thank you.
Well done, Keith. Have we any speakers to this motion? So this is an England-only motion, and so all those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? So that looks as though that's carried with a majority. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation to talk today, to put a motion forward. Belfast's a beautiful city and really enjoyed it. Thank you, Chair. This conference opposes the introduction by Copdend of the new national charging structure in England for dentists with conditions imposed. because it is understood that working with these dentists is part of its role and therefore funded already. Our profession is facing a recruitment crisis, and we need to make it easier for performer list registration. We all know there are huge incompetencies by capita that are delaying the assignment of performers to our NHS lists. There are an increasing number of our colleagues who have come under GDC performance issues but willingly want to be restored back on the NHS list to earn a living. We are now left with Health Education England creating quite a high charging tariff for a service they are and were historically responsible for. Sessional charges are £350 a visit, reporting charges £150. I've been told by tutors that charges could quite easily escalate above £1,200. Don't forget, this could apply to performers who fancy a career break, want to then return to work. Don't forget, it could apply to returning performers who have been sick for various reasons, sometimes involving the GDC. Health Education England are more than often the designated body to facilitate restoration to performers list, as well as supporting new applications for certain overseas performers. Now, I guess we could argue that some costs for the rehabilitation of dentists are their responsibility. If our performers are paying for deanery services, CopDen need to be aware that expectations will be high. Can we not look again at this charge tariff with a view to waiving charges for new registrants to help recruitment and possibly reducing charges for dentists in difficulty who may already be facing increasing indemnity costs and not be in current employment? Do our colleagues deserve free deanery support? Remember, before 2017 December, it was free. Should we support our performers in difficulty and also performers who want to come and work within our precious NHS service that needs new recruits? If the answer is yes, then vote for this motion or give us reasons why we shouldn't. Thank you.
Thank you, Az. Are we any speakers to this motion? So let's go to a vote. This is an England-only motion, so all those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? That's carried with a majority. Thank you.